So joining us now, the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it here on CNN this morning. Is this cleanup, in your estimation, happening fast enough? Is there a deadline when all this contaminated material will be removed from East Palestine?
Well, it has to be driven by safety, but it is definitely something that's moving swiftly. EPA is on the ground, as they have been from the very first stage of this situation. And of course, you've got a lot of water, a lot of soil, a lot of material that has to be moved, has to be disposed of, and all of that has to be done safely. My colleague, the EPA administrator, I think is going to be on the ground again shortly, and he's been very focused on making sure this is done right. Over on our side in the Department of Transportation, we're focusing on lessons learned when it comes to rail safety. The reality is that the freight rail industry has wielded a lot of power in Washington, but this is a moment when I believe we can raise the bar in terms of what we expect and what we require from freight railroads so that fewer communities have to go through what the people of East Palestine are dealing with right now.
All right, let's follow up on that. A couple of things that you said. You said water, oil, and material that needs to be disposed of. Nearly 5,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil, close to 2 million gallons of liquid waste have been removed from the site, bound for EPA certified locations across Ohio, one in Indiana, as a matter of fact. So speaking of the shipping process, the safety of the railroads, what can you tell us about this process? And is this shipping process safe, Mr. Secretary?
The EPA sees to making sure that all of this is held to an extremely rigorous standard. Those certifications are not something that they just give out. And they work with parties that are very experienced in dealing with exactly these types of materials. Certainly not something that is taken lightly. And I know this is getting direct attention from the highest levels of EPA because it is a concern in the community. And of course, people have questions about where this material is going, how it's being disposed of. But again, it's being handled by organizations that are experienced in dealing with exactly this kind of material.
All right, a little bit more about the timeline here, because the waste removal was paused over the weekend following complaints from Texas and Michigan officials who said that they didn't know the waste would come to their jurisdictions. Why didn't they know what was coming their way?
I don't know all the details of the environmental cleanup process. What I know is that there are ways that are set up for states to communicate with each other about this. And there's often a private sector role as contractors who have that extremely rigorous EPA certification step up to do some of that challenging work. This is something that both in responding to disasters like this and in more routine operations happens a lot, which is why it is regulated so tightly, so carefully, and so closely. And EPA has taken over the process that was originally led by Norfolk Southern to make sure that it's going to be handled well.
Well, of course, as every situation, politics are playing a role in this. Some Republicans are calling for your resignation. The Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, didn't go that far. Listen to this, and then we'll get your response.
Unfortunately, this leadership has cut a sharp contrast with the Biden administration's Secretary of Transportation. Even amidst a catalog of crises on his watch, from this and other recent train derailments to the meltdown in air travel back during the holiday season, Secretary Buttigieg has seemed more interested in pursuing press coverage for woke initiatives and climate nonsense than in attending to basic elements of his day job.
Woke initiatives and climate nonsense. What's your response, Mr. Secretary?
Well, first of all, Leader McConnell was there celebrating the replacement of the Brent Spence Bridge, a major infrastructure project that we are funding in his state. I would not call the Brent Spence Bridge a woke initiative. As for climate is not nonsense. Dealing with climate change is one of the biggest things that people like me and people like him will be remembered for after we're gone. And third, he is the caucus leader in the Senate. He could be a partner to us right now in making sure that there are fewer rail disasters in the future. As I mentioned earlier, the freight rail industry has wielded a lot of power here in Washington. I would love to see Leader McConnell join us in standing up to them. There are specific things that could be done right now. He's a Senate leader. He could work with us to do things like raise the cap on the fines. Right now, a major safety violation that our department discovers, the most we can fine a multi-billion-dollar rail company for is in the six figures. He could work with us right now to accelerate the timeline for bringing in tank cars, fortified tank cars that are less likely to spill when there's a derailment. He could work with us right now to give our department a freer hand on things like braking regulations and regulations on hazardous material transportation. So if he is serious about this, if anyone, Republican or Democrat or Independent, is serious about this, they can work with us today.
Have you reached
and the
out
rest
to them?
Is just politics. Absolutely. We have made it very clear publicly what Congress can do. I know there's some talk of legislation coming together. We are actively proposing the things that we think need to happen, in addition to doing the things that we can do with the powers that we do have, like a program for stepped-up inspection along some of the routes that are impacted by these kinds of materials. And something that I re-upped my call for the railroads to do that they could literally do today, which is to join a close call reporting system that protects whistleblowers who spot issues that could lead to accidents. Right now, not one freight railroad company participates. I've given them till the end of the week to let me know whether they're going to accept my call for them to join this or reject it.
I want to make sure that I get as much in as possible. I want to ask you, there's, as with the border, lots of consternation about going there and seeing firsthand. And now that you have been to East Palestine and you've seen the devastation firsthand, it's his decision ultimately, but I have to ask you, do you think that President Biden, should visit and speak with families there?
Well, what I know is he's been very concerned throughout this process about what the people of East Palestine are going through. I think also a visit at that level can sometimes have a lot of disruptive effects, so would need to be thought of carefully. But I'm certainly glad that I went. Michael Regan, our EPA administrator, has been there twice and I think is preparing for a third visit. That's probably the most cabinet level on-the-ground presence for a rail disaster in recent memory, with good reason, because the people of this community are going through a lot. They need to see that their administration is working for them, as we have been, with personnel from the EPA, from my department, and others on the ground from the very first hours of this situation unfolding.
While we have you here, more politics to discuss. There is an internal audit of your use of FAA jets for official trips following a request for review by Senator Marco Rubio. It also scrutinized Elaine Chao's private jet travel as transportation secretary. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, here's how we handle my travel. The vast majority of the time I travel on commercial airlines in economy class, but there is a portion of the time, I'd say about 10 to 20%, when we use our agency's aircraft. This is not chartering a private jet. This is a government aircraft that is assigned to the FAA. Usually when we use it, that's because for me to travel with staff turns out to be cheaper than buying all of those airline tickets. Occasionally it's because of a security or a logistical issue, but the number one reason we would use that agency aircraft is that it actually works out to be less expensive for taxpayers than the commercial airline tickets would be. We keep very meticulous records on that, so precisely so that if somebody wants to look at it, somebody wants to audit it, it's well documented. So I welcome that independent look so that we can get past the politics of this and make sure everybody understands the facts.
So no concerns about this, you welcome?
Yeah, it's good for it to get an independent look. I mean, I won't say anything about the motivations of the senator. I'll just say that we are here with the facts, and we'll put forward the math, and I think people will see how we make these decisions, why we make these decisions, and I think it's a good thing for people to understand that.
Secretary Pete Buttigieg, thank you.
Thank you.